Cocksucking little cunts. Look at these cocksucking little cunts. Topic is locked. So my own fucking post, my thread, is being locked because I just didn't like the truth. TV license resistance, more like truth resistance. They don't want to hear pure fucking facts. They don't want to know. They want to know what they want to fucking talk about. They don't understand fuck all. They think they know, and they've avoided shit for 20 years, but they seem to think that consent only goes so far. They think they've got consent on one hand and then they can take it away on the other. It's all bullshit. You have consent. It's up to you. TV license resistance. What a bunch of fucking cunts. TV license resistance. Don't bother going to this shitty site because your forum threads will just get locked. You know what I mean? They ask you to explain your case, you explain your case, they say you're going to lose, and they expect you to accept that. So what's the point? Is it all disinformation? What is the point of this site? It's bullshit. And then they lock it when they think that, you know what I mean, that they think that they're the only ones that has an opinion. Anyone that contradicts their opinion, they lock it. They lock it down. And I don't even know if I've got access to what I was writing. Let's see. So I want to get it on video. Here we go. I got it. This is what I was trying to write. If everything you all say is 100% true, then I should be locked up for killing people in the future because I happen to have access to knives and stuff. But just because I could watch BBC or any other channel doesn't mean I will. And no matter what, your consent is required. No matter what people tell you, your consent is required. Even for jail, you go by choice or voluntary. When a judge says, "Do you understand?" that's asking you, isn't it? So don't say you don't have consent, because when a judge is saying, "Do you understand?" that's clear enough to me that there's a question being asked. And if he doesn't ask that question and sends you to jail, not having on record that you do understand, then come on, mate. I'm not taking the piss. I'm not making this bullshit up. Why would a judge bother asking? If they've got authority to put you in jail without your consent, then why? Tell me. Tell me why bother asking. There's no reason to ask you if he doesn't need to ask. He asks because he requires consent. We're governed by consent. You're volunteering to go to jail when you say yes. When you say yes, you're accepting liability. So when they pass judgment and then say, "Do you understand?" for the final time, he's basically saying, "Do you agree? Do you agree with what judgment I've just passed or offered to you?" A judge has made an offer. Now, if there's any judges out there, please come forward, even if you have to make up an anonymous account and you don't want to get involved, but you want information to get out there. I know you probably won't, but at the same time, it's to clear up these simple things, because there's so much disinformation out there by these fucking websites, TV license resistance. They think they can have their pie and eat it too, saying that they can stay there for 20 years, not let anyone in, and then say they haven't got consent and they're all governed without consent, but at the same time saying that they don't let them in their property for 20 years and they've never got done. That means that you've got consent then, doesn't it? You can't have it both ways. You're contradicting yourself. I'm not even past the first fucking paragraph yet. So, as I was saying, right, if it was the case that I had no consent, and it was the case that I have to abide all laws, and it's the case that BBC are broadcasting and thus you have to pay for a license because they're broadcasting without me asking for them to broadcast, I never asked them to do that, that means I should be done for every future crime. Like, I should be done for a crime that I could potentially do. Is what I'm trying to say, is I've got access to knives, therefore I should be locked up for potentially killing people, stabbing people. That's not the case. We have consent. We choose whether we do something or if we don't do something. Actions do speak louder than words, you know. So yeah, just because I have access to knives and stuff, does that mean that I'm going to do it? No. Just because I have access to BBC or stuff, does that mean I'm obligated to watch it and consent to their bloody acts? No. I don't know how to explain to some people. No matter what, your consent is required. Alright? Even if you go to jail, you're there by voluntary. You're there voluntary. Judge will blatantly ask you, "Do you understand?" Okay, then you say, "No, I do not accept liability." Okay, so I'm saying you're governed by consent, and you lot on this shitty site, TruthResistance.info, which I'll now refer to as Truth Resistance, because that's what you are, disinfo motherfuckers. You're saying that you're governed without consent, and you'd rather be governed without consent, and believe you're forced to do something which you may not be happy with. That's deluded. No offence to anyone, but that is deluded, and you do deserve to be governed if that's your true belief. And trust, they administer Crown's property, titles, they own trust. The trust they administer in the Crown property which protects man and women. So you use these as an asset, not as, it doesn't hinder you, this is an asset to you. No problem, they own copyright, yeah? So, as I've stated here, your titles, you go in there and say, oh, I can't say my name, it's copyright, they will waive that copyright. That tells you that they have copyright, and thus they administer, and they're actually liable for you in a certain extent, because they own you, they own your legal fiction. And if you can get them to admit that in a court, which you can do, it has been done, then they accept liability as well, and they'll abandon ship. They'll go out of the court. They'll abandon ship over it, because they'll find themselves in the catch-22 situation where they are administering a trust, also known as your name. Right? Your name is a trust. It's a title. Mr. or Mrs. is a title. It's up to you if you operate under that agent title. It's up to you. Even if you have an ID, it doesn't mean you're operating under that ID. And it certainly doesn't mean you're operating under it at the time of alleged offence. I'm not saying go out and commit offences and try and use this as an argument or an excuse. It doesn't work like that. If you have done something, as I've said before, you should be held liable for it. If you've committed any harm, injury or loss, then you should have the full blunt of the law, and you will have under common law. There's no problem with that. I'm not arguing that law is pointless. I'm not saying that at all. Law is great. Common law is great. That's what you should stand under, common law. These acts and stats are literally given the power of law with the consent of the governed, in black and white, plain English. Okay? Just to end any misconceptions out there, and stay away from this Truth Resistance .info site, otherwise known as TV License Resistance, because it's bullshit. It's fucking propaganda bullshit. They're pro BBC, pro acts and stats, even though they clearly slag it off. They slag off my arguments when they're more, in my opinion, valid than theirs, even though they've avoided it for 20 years, and their argument is they're not governed by consent. But how can they stand on their door and deny a search warrant? How? Unless they have consent. So how is their argument holding any weight at this point? I don't understand that. So this thread has been locked. That's the reason why I made this post. I'm going to go back once more. I might just copy this just for laughs. Right, I'll go back, and you might be able to see some other posts in the thread. Here we go. Look, I'm with UBB, I was never in it to start with. Look, that's the last comment that was made. I tried to be patient. It's like banging against the wall. All these people are saying in one hand that you haven't got consent, at the same time they're saying you have. They're just as schizophrenic and confused as the people making these acts. Okay, at many points there in this thread they've made accusations of acts being laws, and they're not. Acts are given the power of law, the consent of the governed, everyone knows that. As soon as I mentioned it to the 6 people that are here that day, which is what this case is about, they all knew that. As soon as I mentioned that, they ran out of here pretty much. They couldn't leave quick enough. They got me to sign something under duress before I could even get to my camera, which I regret. I wish I had my camera charged up ready, but it didn't happen. They got here, they made me sign it, otherwise they wouldn't leave. And it's just bullshit. They're suggesting that, can I suggest we pin this so newbies know not to go on about free man and land wobble. I haven't mentioned any free man and land. They've assumed all that just because I said the word consent. How can one word cause this much controversy and 3 pages of bullshit of people saying, oh yeah, you haven't got consent, and say they can stay at their doorstep for 20 years without paying their TV licence and saying that they haven't got consent at the same time as they can deny a search warrant. How can they do that if they haven't got consent? It doesn't make any fucking sense. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You know, they do say in here some valid points, don't get me wrong. They say things like, oh, you can't opt in and opt out of certain acts. Well, actually, why not? It does require your consent. So if you think that act may be illegal or fraudulent, you have a duty. You know, you have a duty not to accept. So there are clauses, there are circumstances, there are things that, you know, where if you have a verbal contract that outweighs commercial contract law and stuff like that. Anyone will tell you that. If verbal contract is quite important. It's better if you got evidence of it, obviously. You know, there are tacit agreements as well and stuff like that. I don't know it all. I'm telling you right now, I don't. I'm just delving into this because I need to out of necessity. And that's the reason why this thread was started, to learn more and to try and share a bit of knowledge and get guidance and work out if there's any precedent set for winning a case. As soon as I mentioned, is there anyone known of anyone that's won a case against TV licence or Capita or any BBC or anything like that, anyone won to anyone's knowledge. As soon as I mentioned that, a couple more posts were let through. Someone made a comment about this should be pinned, and now the comments locked. It's 5 pages now. There were 3 last time I looked. Now there's 5 pages. You know, no wonder why people's getting stressed, because they can't stand under the statements they've made. They contradict themselves and therefore don't want ridicule. They don't want their site to get, exposed for what it is, which is total bullshit truth resistance, disinformation bastards. That's all they are, and that's why I'm exposing this site, is because one minute they're saying you haven't got consent, you're governed without consent, and in the next breath they're saying, yeah, well, we can get away with it because we don't sign, we don't let people in. Well, then you must have consent if you didn't let them in. If you're not governed by consent, they wouldn't need your consent, therefore they'd get in your property. You wouldn't have 20 years without a fucking licence, would you? I just find it rather strange that they contradict themselves and talk about free man on land, which they brought up. I never brought up free man on land. Got no problem with them, and I've got no reason to use that as a defence. That's not part of my movement. Individually is the only way, really, that if you think about it, everything's done a case by case basis with its merits. Now, that's the same for free man on land. You need to go as a free man individually and then find that don't work because they've noticed that they can't let all these people do that. You need to come up with original ways to do things. That's why I've separated myself from all these little groups. I've seen them, I've heard about them, I've watched their videos. Doesn't mean I'm a part of it. Just because I've used one word, consent, they automatically assume I'm part of that movement. And it's just madness. There's other words as well, that's just a word. Why let words control you? It's just total madness. But yeah, there's 5 pages of this, and here's a link. I'll put the link in the description to the video as well. I just think it's fucking funny.